Hello everyone, welcome back. I'm Kris. This video is sponsored by Mohamed. He wanted me to do Misquoting Jesus in the Bible. I've done the first 3 parts. It's been a couple days. I went back. As soon as I clicked on the video, it started playing, so I went back. So if the previous video, I was at like 47:40 or whatever, I just went back just because it plays. Okay? This one we're going to run to about be 60. It'll be about an hour and 4 minutes or so. We'll see how we feel until we get started. So there's a thanks button on the channel. You can donate. You don't have to. If you do and you request a video, your name will be appearing as sponsored by for the video. Subscribe if you'd like to, and thumbs up, bare minimum, please. All right, video.
That's to befall you. He's more concerned about these women than himself in Luke's gospel. In Luke's gospel, he's not quiet while he's being nailed to the cross. He prays, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." While he's hanging on the cross, he actually has an intelligent conversation with one of the robbers. The one guy maligns Jesus. The other robber says to the other person to be quiet because Jesus hasn't done anything to deserve this. And then he turns to Jesus and says, "Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus says, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." Jesus knows exactly what's happening to him in Luke's gospel. Not in Mark, but in Luke he knows exactly what's happening to him. He knows what's going to happen to him after it happens to him. He's going to wake up in paradise, and this guy's going to be next to him. And at the end, the most telling thing of all is that Jesus, instead of crying out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" He doesn't say that in Luke. What he says is, "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit." And he dies. In Luke's gospel, Jesus is completely in control of the situation. He knows what's going on. He knows why it's going on, unlike Mark, where he seems to be in doubt. This verse about "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing" is a very interesting verse. In early Christianity, this verse was interpreted not as a prayer of forgiveness for the Romans who were crucifying him. It was interpreted as a prayer for the Jews who had turned Jesus over to the authorities. Jesus is asking for forgiveness for the Jewish people in the interpretation of the early Christian interpreters of the passage. That makes it striking that in some manuscripts from the early years, this prayer is omitted by some scribes. Why would scribes take that lovely verse out? Well, it should be obvious why they took it out. They took it out because they interpreted it as a prayer of forgiveness for Jews, and these scribes didn't think God had ever forgiven the Jews. In the 2nd and 3rd centuries, Christians started saying that...
I was going to say, maybe they don't believe... Maybe they don't believe the Jewish people should be forgiven for that. That's what I was thinking when he was saying that. That they just didn't believe that because they were the ones who got Jesus busted, arrested. The fuzz came after him. So they didn't believe that the Jewish people should be forgiven for that as punishment for a lifetime. That was my thinking when he said that.
Jews are guilty for the killing of Christ, and that, in fact, the destruction of the city of Jerusalem in the year 70 by the Roman armies was a punishment by God given to the Jewish people for rejecting their own Messiah. In the 2nd and 3rd centuries, we have Christians who are saying that Jesus was God, so that when Jews, they would say, when Jews are responsible for the death of Jesus, we have some authors saying Jews are guilty of deicide. Jews have killed God, and God held them responsible.
Deicide? I've never heard the word deicide. Deicide. So I'm guessing because he was a Messiah. Deicide. Wow, this gnat. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to find out where your family's from. I'm going to kill them, except for your children. And then your children, I'm going to put in a box and mail to another country with a ransom note to other gnats. I don't see it anymore. Did I kill it? I don't know. Jesus would have wanted me to kill that gnat. Okay? He says it. Sometime.
What's a scribe who thinks that going to do with his prayer of forgiveness? He's going to take it out. And that's exactly what happens. Some of our early manuscripts are missing the prayer. They're missing it because scribes have changed it for reasons of their own. These are some of the big differences that you can find in the New Testament manuscripts, and there are all sorts of differences that you find. Some are related to theological disputes of early Christianity, where scribes have changed the text to make it coincide more closely with their own theological views. Some of these changes have to do with relationships of Christians and Jews. Some of these changes have to do with Christian understandings of women. There continue to be debates today in churches, Christian churches, about whether women should have leadership roles. Well, these debates often hinge on verses that have been changed by scribes. You can guess which way scribes changed these verses. In the 2nd and 3rd centuries, when women's roles were being suppressed, all of a sudden manuscripts start showing up in which women are told to be silent in the churches. This is the sort of change that scribes made. The textual critic is somebody who tries to deal with this phenomenon of manuscripts that have so many changes in them. There are actually two things that a textual critic does. One thing that is, of course, primary importance is to figure out what an author actually wrote. Because you can't interpret an author, whether you're talking about Plato or Aristophanes.
2 gnats committed suicide in my tea. All right. You win that round.
Or Homer, or Mark, or Matthew, or Luke, or John. You can't interpret what an author said unless you can't interpret what he said unless you know what he said. You've got to have his words, and so textual critics try to reconstruct to the best of their ability what an author actually wrote. A textual critic also, though, is interested in knowing why the text got changed. Why did scribes change the text? I mean, it's interesting to see that sometimes they fell asleep, but beyond that, what kind of theological motivations were there for changing the text? What kind of ideological influence were affecting these scribes?
If you believe that he's the Messiah, I apologize for all the pausing, but if you believe he's the Messiah, and there's a text that doesn't specifically, it leaves you questioning if he is, deleted or changed a little bit. Remove some of the question words and put in, if he's going, oh Father, why have you forsaken me? Remove that part, because who's the Father? He's God as a human, right? So who would he be talking to? Remove any of that and change it a little bit so that he's not talking to a father that way. He's more, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not going to get into that because I don't really know how to word it properly, but you understand what I'm saying. Just simply remove the doubt that he might be saying in that the scribes, or not the scribes, but Paul and Peter and whoever else was on the Beatles, that they might be making these statements that Jesus said, and it could be led to being a question. Remove that, so you remove the question and make that turn into a statement. So that statement now has become a fact. Do you understand? I'm sorry for the pausing.
When we know more of that kind of information, we're better able to understand both the scribes and their own historical context as people living in the early centuries, especially the early centuries, a time period about which we have very little information about Christianity otherwise. Thank you very much.
That's not all the video, right? Is this a Q&A now?
There are microphones on both sides, and I think we'll alternate. And can I just say that I will, if it doesn't sound like the question was loud enough, I'll repeat the question to make sure everybody heard it. So yes, start over here.
Yes. Early in your conversation or in your presentation, you mentioned that the Bible is often used in social situations, and you mentioned in particularly abortion, war, and what was the other one? Gay rights. Have any of the differences that you have found or others have found affected how those concepts would be interpreted?
Did you all hear that? Yeah. The kinds of social issues that are pressing for us today were not pressing to the scribes who were copying the texts. They simply had a whole different range of issues that they were far more concerned about. And so the passages that people leap on today to try and resolve certain kinds of issues simply didn't have that kind of importance to most of the scribes. So the answer is no. Most of those passages weren't affected. Yes?
Are you familiar with the book of Urantia?
Every time I give a talk, I have people ask me to read it, but I have not yet done so.
Well, it's an interesting read because often there's an expanded text on, might be one line in the New Testament, and in Urantia there might be 3 paragraphs. So
Yes.
I commend it to you.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Your comments on 2 other books, one of them the Gospel of Judas and the other the Sword of Christian, Constantine. Also, I'm an Ehrman.
Really? How do you spell it?
Ehrman.
Oh, okay. Go for it. Yeah, okay, he's asking about 2 of the books, the Gospel of Judas Iscariot. Yeah, actually, let me tell a story about the Gospel, because I was... when National Geographic was considering whether to finance the publication and dissemination of the Gospel of Judas, they called me and asked me if I would help them authenticate the manuscript, which is my first indication that National Geographic absolutely had no clue what they were doing with this manuscript, because it's written in Coptic, which I can read Coptic, but I'm not a Coptic scholar, right? And so I told the woman who had called me, I said, well, look, you need a Coptologist to do this. She said, oh yeah, great. Okay, what's a Coptologist? A Coptologist is an expert in Coptic language who can, and she said, well, what we really want to do is date this manuscript. And I said, oh, well, to date the manuscript, then you need to get a paleographer. She said, oh, okay, great, yeah. What's a paleographer? Yeah. So then she said, well, really what we really want to do is carbon-14 date the manuscript. Are you able to help us with the carbon-14 dating? So yeah, right. Every Friday night I carbon-14 date manuscripts. So no, I can't help you with carbon-14 dating. You need a scientist for that. I said, look, I'll find you a Coptic paleographer, and you find a scientist who can carbon-14. And they said, well, we want you to be involved with this, though, because we want somebody who's interested in early Christianity and knows about Gospels that didn't make it in. I said, no, I'm happy to be involved. I said, but where's the manuscript? She said, it's in Geneva. I said, okay, count me in. And so we went to Geneva. I have a friend, a guy named Stephen Emmel, teaches in Germany, who's a Coptic paleographer, and called him up, and I said, Stephen, I don't know if you've heard these rumors, but the Gospel of Judas has turned up. And Emmel says, yeah. He says, you know what? I think I saw it 20 years ago. I said, oh my God, you want to see it again? He said, yeah. I said, okay, let's go to Geneva. And so we did. So the Gospel of Judas is it's the most recent discovery of an early Christian text. It was actually discovered 30 years ago now, 1978. But it's a very long story. It was unknown basically to everybody until just 3 or 4 years ago, when it finally got into the hands of competent scholars and conservationists who could put it back together, because it was fragmented in 1,000 pieces. But it's a very interesting gospel because it's a gospel that is a Gnostic gospel that talks about how this world we live in is not the creation of the one true God, but is a creation of lower, inferior divinities. And the point of salvation is to escape this world. Okay, if you all know Gnosticism, I'm sorry, I'm taking a little longer on this than I should, but if you know the world of Gnosticism, the Gnostic Gospels, Gnostic Christians were people who felt like they were entrapped in their bodies in this world, that they were imprisoned in bodies, and that because the creator of this world wasn't the one true God, he was a lower divinity. So the way I illustrate this with my students is, you know how sometimes people feel like they're alienated in this world, like they look around, they just don't feel like they belong here. You know, they look around and this world just doesn't make sense to them. I felt this way till the last election, actually. I mean, I knew people that seemed to do just fine, but it didn't make sense to me. I realized I don't belong here. I'm from another world, and these friends of mine are not from another world. They belong here. And so these Gnostics thought that they need to escape this world by having secret knowledge, and these Gnostic Gospels are Gospels that provide the secret knowledge. So the Gospel of Judas is that kind of thing. The most important discovery of a Christian book in the last 60 years, in my opinion. The other question was about the Sword of Constantine, written by James Carroll, which is, I think, a terrific book, a really good read, about basically about Jewish-Christian relations, in short, but how the relationship of Christianity and Judaism changed when the Emperor Constantine became a Christian. I think that's a very fine book. Yes.
I was wondering if you would say a word about Marcion, and also if you would consider 1 Clement to be a first-century witness to the text of 1 Corinthians.
Oh, wow. I feel like I'm in my doctoral exam all of a sudden. Wow. Okay. Yeah. Okay, Marcion. The short on Marcion. Marcion was probably the most important Christian thinker of the 2nd century. He was a kind of a teacher philosopher type from Asia Minor, who took the Apostle Paul very seriously when Paul differentiated between the gospel of Christ and the law of the Jews. Paul thought that a person could not be made God by keeping the requirements of the Jewish law, but a person had to have faith in Christ. And so this differentiation between law and gospel for Marcion became an absolute differentiation, that the God who gave the law could not be the God who gave the gospel. So that Marcion taught that there were actually two different gods, that the God of the Old Testament was in fact a different God from the God of Jesus. That the God of Jesus, in fact, tried to save people from the condemnation of the God of the Jews. The idea is the God of the Jews created this world, gave Israel the law, everybody breaks this law, and so this Jewish God condemns them. Justly. I mean, they broke the law, so they're condemned. Jesus comes from a higher God who never had anything to do with this world before Jesus showed up. Jesus came to save people from the wrathful God of the Jews. And so Marcion tried to propound this point of view and won a lot of converts. In fact, in his day, he was extremely successful. There were a lot of Marcionite churches that started up. And in some parts of the Christian world, it looks like this Marcionite understanding of Christianity was the dominant form of Christianity. In this form of Christianity, the Christian Bible didn't have an Old Testament, because that was the book of the Jews. And it had the Christian New Testament consisted of Paul's letters. Marcion knew of 10 of Paul's letters, and one gospel, the Gospel of Luke. So it was Luke and 10 letters. I mean, some of us are glad that Marcion didn't succeed, because those of us who teach New Testament would only have half-time jobs now. Anyway, so that was Marcion. The second question is, does 1 Clement give us any attestation for the text of 1 Corinthians? So 1 Clement is a book that is in a collection called the Apostolic Fathers. It was probably written in the mid-90s, and so it was actually written before some of the books of the New Testament. It was written to the church in Corinth by the Christians of Rome. And it was actually kind of an interesting situation that led to this letter. There apparently was some kind of ecclesiastical coup in Corinth, where the leaders of the church had been ousted somehow or other. We don't know how. And some other people had taken over, and the people in Rome didn't like it. And they tried to reverse this coup that had happened. And so this author then is writing to the church in Corinth to try and straighten things out. And this author knows about 1 Corinthians, and in fact reflects a lot of Paul's letter, 1 Corinthians, which was written about 30 years earlier. I don't think it gives us any help for knowing the text of 1 Corinthians, if by that you mean, does it help us reconstruct what the actual words of 1 Corinthians were? I don't think it helps us with that, but it does reflect many of the themes that you find in 1 Corinthians. Yes?
With the...
I'm going to end it there before we get into the next question. It's good so far. But we're going to cut it there because it is 8:05 and I've got to get cleaned up so I can go to bed. It was a long day today. Long day. All right. Well, this is part 4. We'll be back with part 5 tomorrow, which part 4, this will be Thursday. So this will be 4th of July. Hey, congratulations to you out there. Part 5 will be up on Friday, and then part 6 will rotate to Monday. All right, just so we're clear. But until then, have a good day, have a good night.